At the family will reading, my sister said, "She's nothing but a failure in a cheap dress." My aunt smirked, even Dad said she'd never succeed. My cousin added, "She showed up in a taxi," enough said. Hours later, my old teacher walked in with a sealed envelope. When he opened it, my sister's face turned white. My dad passed away recently, and the family gathered for the reading of his will. My sister, Charlotte, Aunt Gloria, and cousin Jared all gathered around, practically salivating over what they thought they were going to get. When the lawyer read the will, I got the bare minimum, a small sum to live a modest life, as my dad put it. My sister laughed, my aunt made her usual judgmental remarks, and my cousin added his 2 cents. But then, my old teacher, Mr. Vance, walked in with an envelope my dad had entrusted him with years ago. What happened next completely changed everything. I wasn't expecting what happened, and neither were they. It was a Tuesday when I found myself sitting at a long wooden table in the dimly lit conference room of my father's lawyer's office. The smell of aged wood and coffee filled the air, and I could hear the low murmur of distant voices outside the door, muffled by the thick walls. The only people in the room were my immediate family, Charlotte, my older sister, Aunt Gloria, my dad's younger sister, Jared, my cousin who was about my age but always seemed to be a step ahead, and me. I don't even know why I had come. To be honest, I hadn't spoken to my father in years, not really. We had a complicated relationship, to put it mildly. Dad, Richard Beaumont, was never the warm and fuzzy type. He was stoic, emotionally distant, and believed in hard work above all else. He'd never been the type to offer praise, but he also didn't offer much else either. I had lived my life quietly, maybe not as ambitiously as Charlotte or Jared, but I had carved out a life that suited me. I wasn't rich, I wasn't flashy, but I was content. Not that anyone in my family ever saw it that way. They all believed that life was a competition, and they were the winners, while I was simply the underachiever. Charlotte had always been the golden child, the perfect daughter who could do no wrong in Dad's eyes. She was a high-powered lawyer, always dressed in the best suits and always had something sharp to say. Aunt Gloria was a constant presence in our lives, critical, always keeping a watchful eye on every move I made, waiting for me to mess up. And then there was Jared. Jared was, well, Jared. He had the charm, the looks, the everything. He seemed to glide through life effortlessly while I stumbled and fumbled, trying to find my place. When Dad passed away, I didn't expect much. I certainly didn't expect anything to change between us, not now. But here we were, gathered in that cold room, all waiting for the lawyer to read his will. "I know this is hard," Mr. Harrington, the lawyer, said as he adjusted his glasses. "But we need to go over your father's final wishes. I'm sure you're all aware of how important this is." I could barely pay attention to him as my thoughts swirled. The sound of the paper shuffling in his hands was the only thing that pierced the silence. And then, without further preamble, he began reading. "Richard Beaumont has asked me to inform his heirs of his last will and testament," Mr. Harrington started. "To my daughter Charlotte, I leave the family estate and all associated assets. You have been a beacon of success in this family, and I trust you will maintain the legacy I have built with strength and dignity." Charlotte's lips curved into a smirk, as if she'd known exactly what was coming. Her eyes glimmered with pride as she leaned back in her chair, a quiet sense of victory radiating from her. "To my son Jared," the lawyer continued, "I leave my collection of rare paintings and my car. I know you have an appreciation for art and fine things, and I trust you will continue the Beaumont tradition of luxury." Jared didn't hide his satisfaction either. He gave a small nod, as though he had expected this, and folded his arms across his chest, his posture relaxed. "And finally," Mr. Harrington said, pausing before he turned to me. "To my daughter Lila, I leave a modest sum of money sufficient to live a modest life, but not enough to sustain any delusions of grandeur. Lila has, unfortunately, never shown an understanding of the value of hard work. I trust she will make use of this gift wisely and not squander it like she has every opportunity in her life." I felt the words hit me like a punch to the gut. My father's cold, blunt words were like ice water poured over me. I had always known he didn't think much of me, but hearing it so plainly, in front of everyone, was humbling. I didn't respond. I just stared straight ahead, my hands gripping the arms of the chair as tightly as I could, trying to keep it together. Charlotte's laugh broke the silence, soft and cruel. "I told you," she said, her voice dripping with condescension. "You're nothing but a failure in a cheap dress." Aunt Gloria chimed in next, her sharp tone cutting through the room. "Even your father said you'd never succeed. It's such a shame, really. I always thought you had so much potential, but I guess you were never cut out for this." Jared snorted, shaking his head. "And you showed up in a taxi, Lila." "Enough said. It's like you don't even care." Their words stung, but I stayed quiet. What was the point of saying anything? They had made their minds up long ago about me, about my life, and nothing I said would change that. I wasn't like them, and I never would be. But just as I was about to stand up and leave, a voice from the back of the room interrupted the tension. "I believe there's something else," the voice said. I turned around, surprised to see a familiar figure standing in the doorway. It was Mr. Vance, my high school teacher. I hadn't seen him in years, not since graduation. He had been the one person who had believed in me, who had always encouraged me to follow my own path, no matter how unconventional it was. Mr. Vance walked toward the table, holding a sealed envelope in his hands. Everyone in the room looked confused, but none more so than Charlotte. Her confident, self-assured demeanor faltered for the first time. Mr. Harrington looked at him, slightly perplexed. "Mr. Vance, what's this?" Mr. Vance placed the envelope down on the table and spoke softly. "Your father gave this to me years ago, just after graduation. He told me to hold on to it and to only give it to you when the time was right. He was clear that it should only be given to Lila, and that the others should not be privy to it." The air in the room shifted. Aunt Gloria narrowed her eyes. Charlotte's gaze became hard, calculating. Jared's face turned slightly pale, though he quickly masked it with a casual shrug. Mr. Harrington took the envelope, his hands trembling slightly as he opened it. Inside, he found a letter. He began to read aloud. "To my daughter Lila, I know that I've never been the father you wanted me to be. I've always been too hard on you, too focused on what I thought you should be, rather than seeing the woman you were becoming. I have watched you, though, from afar, and I can say this, I am proud of the life you've built for yourself, no matter how different it has been from what I expected. I leave to you my most prized possession, the original manuscript of a novel I wrote many years ago. It's a story that has never been published, and it's the one piece of work I've done for myself and no one else. It's a legacy, my true legacy, and I trust you will decide what to do with it. I hope you will forgive me for not being the father you needed me to be, and I trust that you will find a way to make something beautiful from what I leave you. With love, Richard Beaumont." The words hung in the air like a weight. I could feel the shock spreading through the room. I couldn't speak. I wasn't sure what to feel. It wasn't the inheritance I had imagined, but in that moment, it was more than I could have hoped for. Charlotte's face turned an interesting shade of white, her confidence completely shattered. She opened her mouth, but no words came out. Aunt Gloria looked like she had swallowed something sour. Jared's eyes flickered with something close to envy, but he quickly masked it with a forced smile. Mr. Vance smiled softly at me, his eyes filled with understanding. "Your father had his faults, but in the end, he saw you for who you truly are. I hope this gives you the peace you've been looking for." I stood up slowly, taking the letter in my hands. The world seemed to move in slow motion as I looked at my family. They were all still processing the news, their plans for the inheritance slipping through their fingers like sand. For once, I felt like I was standing on solid ground. The silence in the room was suffocating. I could feel their eyes boring into me, but I didn't turn away. Instead, I clutched the letter in my hands, the weight of it suddenly grounding me in a way I hadn't expected. My father's words, written years ago, were a bitter reminder of all the things he'd never said to me in person. Yet, in that letter, I heard something I'd never heard from him before: recognition. It wasn't much, but it was enough to make me feel like I wasn't invisible anymore. Charlotte was the first to break the silence, her voice sharp, cold. I don't understand. Why would he leave you something like that? She scoffed. A manuscript? Of all things. I didn't respond right away. What could I possibly say to her? She had never understood me. She never would. I could see the disbelief and the jealousy creeping into her eyes. In some way, she had always seen herself as the one who deserved the most. The house, the fortune, the admiration. She had fought for it all, and in her mind, the world owed her that victory. Aunt Gloria let out a quiet, disapproving huff, shifting in her seat. It's just like him, she muttered under her breath, though loud enough for everyone to hear. To waste his time with sentimental nonsense when there's real money to be made. She adjusted her glasses, her expression one of annoyance. A manuscript, of all things. A failed writer's dream. I could feel the anger rising in me, but I forced myself to stay calm. I didn't need to explain anything to them. They wouldn't understand. They never had. Jared, though, was different. I could see his eyes scanning the room, assessing the situation. He wasn't as outwardly emotional as Charlotte or Aunt Gloria, but there was a flicker of something I couldn't quite place, in his gaze. For a brief moment, I caught him looking directly at the manuscript in my hands, his expression hard to read. He wasn't angry, exactly, but I could see a kind of disappointment in his face. Disappointment in what? In the fact that my inheritance didn't come with an expensive piece of jewelry or a valuable asset. Maybe. But then, his smile returned, though it was more strained now. Well, I guess we all have our own path to follow, huh? He shrugged nonchalantly. Some of us get mansions, and others get manuscripts. His tone was mocking, but there was an underlying bitterness to it. I met his gaze for a split second before I turned my attention back to the letter, still processing the enormity of it all. I had spent my entire life trying to make sense of my father's lack of affection, his emotional distance, and now, in his death, he had finally given me something more valuable than any house or bank account could offer. But it wasn't just the manuscript. It was the acknowledgement. The truth that, deep down, he knew me. And that was what hurt the most. I didn't want to break down in front of them, but the tears welled up in my eyes anyway. Not out of anger or frustration, but because I finally understood. My father had never been able to express love in a way I needed, but in the only way he knew how, he had given me his most intimate possession. The one thing that had mattered to him above all else. It was a strange form of redemption for both of us. And I didn't know whether to cry or laugh at the irony of it. For a moment, I closed my eyes, trying to steady my breath. When I opened them again, I saw the faces of my family still staring at me, still processing the situation in their own ways. I had become the unexpected focal point of everything. I don't need this, I finally said, my voice steady, though there was an edge to it. I looked up at them, all of them. I didn't come here for any of this. I'm not asking for your approval, your sympathy, or anything else. But I'm not a failure. And I never have been. Charlotte raised an eyebrow, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. Oh, really? Because it sure seems like the only thing you've managed to do is, well, nothing. Her voice was condescending, dripping with sarcasm. I took a deep breath. I didn't need your approval to be okay with who I am. I've always been fine without it. But clearly, none of you can say the same. There was a pause, and for a brief moment, I saw the hint of vulnerability in Charlotte's expression. But it was quickly gone, replaced by her usual smugness. Well, I'm glad you're finally seeing it my way, she said with a tight smile. But if you think that manuscript is going to change anything, think again. I don't expect it to, I replied, my voice firm. This is mine. And I'm going to do something with it. Aunt Gloria let out a scoff. Sure, you will. Just like everything else you've tried. You're just like your father, too stubborn to know when to give up. I could feel my patience slipping. But before I could respond, Mr. Harrington cleared his throat. "I think it's time we wrap up," he said, glancing at the clock. "We still have a few other matters to address." I nodded, though I wasn't sure why. There was nothing more to discuss. Nothing they could say would change the truth. I had what was mine, and it was enough for me. My father had left me a piece of himself, a final message. And for once, I was finally ready to accept it. But as I gathered my things, a thought crossed my mind. It wasn't about the money or the assets. It was about the story, the legacy, and the future. The manuscript wasn't just a physical object, it was a symbol. It was my chance to finally do something for myself. Maybe I would publish it. Maybe I would just keep it close, hidden away in the depths of my life, where only I could find meaning in it. But one thing was for sure, I would make it mine. And as I walked out of that conference room, with the others still sitting in stunned silence behind me, I felt a strange peace come over me. It wasn't the victory they expected. But for the first time, it was my victory. And that was all that mattered. As I walked out of the conference room, my hands still shaking slightly with the weight of the letter and the manuscript, I felt a surge of power that I hadn't known I was capable of. It wasn't just the inheritance, it was the validation. It was the quiet, undeniable truth that my father, despite everything, had acknowledged me in a way no one else ever had. And that was enough. The cold air outside the office hit me like a wave, and I inhaled deeply, feeling the chill settle against my skin. I had spent so many years trying to understand where I stood in the family, trying to fit into a mold that was never mine. Now, it felt as if a door had opened, and I was finally stepping into the light on my own terms. For the first time, I didn't feel small, overshadowed, or insignificant. I felt like I was in control of my own narrative. I wasn't sure where I was going, but the walk through the busy downtown streets helped clear my mind. The city buzzed around me, cars honking, people talking, the distant hum of life continuing. It felt like nothing had changed. But I had. I was different. It was only when my phone buzzed in my pocket that I realized I had been so absorbed in my thoughts that I hadn't checked it for hours. The message was from my lawyer, Sarah. "Lila, I need to talk to you. There's something important I didn't mention earlier. Call me when you can." I felt my heart race for a moment. What now? Was there more to the will that I hadn't seen? Could there be a complication? But then I remembered that the letter, the manuscript, it was mine. I was done letting them dictate my life. I found a quiet bench in a nearby park, sat down, and called Sarah. "Lila," she said, her voice tight but calm. "There's something you need to know." After the will reading, I went over the paperwork again. I found something unusual, something that wasn't included in the initial documents, but your father had made a note. It seems he left another clause, something that wasn't made public at the reading. I frowned, feeling an uneasy twist in my stomach. "What do you mean? Another clause?" "Listen carefully," Sarah continued. "Your father made it clear that in the event of his death, the estate and everything he left behind was to be managed by someone who truly understood the family legacy, someone who could keep the Beaumont name intact. And he left behind a provision that effectively overrides the primary inheritance." My heart skipped a beat. "What provision?" "Lila, you were meant to be the one to manage the estate." I sat frozen, unsure if I'd heard her right. "What do you mean?" "Charlotte gets the estate, doesn't she?" Sarah's voice softened. "That's what it appeared to be. But there's more. Your father's note was specific. He didn't trust anyone but you to manage the estate and the family's legacy properly. Charlotte, well, she's not listed as the primary executor, and Jared isn't either. The clause specifically names you as the person responsible for maintaining the estate and assets. It's in your father's final instructions, signed and dated a week before his passing." The air left my lungs, and for a moment everything around me seemed to blur. This couldn't be real. My father had always been so certain of Charlotte. So why me? "Are you sure?" I whispered, my voice trembling. this can't be right. I double-checked, Sarah replied. It's there. Your father knew exactly what he was doing. He believed you had the integrity and wisdom to carry on the Beaumont name, despite what he may have said in the will. The assets, everything, now legally falls under your control. I sat back against the bench, stunned. My mind was racing. I had been handed a massive responsibility, one I hadn't anticipated. But for the first time in my life, it felt like it was my turn to finally stand tall. The air around me seemed to shift. The weight of the moment settled on my shoulders, but it was a weight I was ready to carry. The following days were a blur. I didn't rush into any decisions, but instead, I took the time to reflect on everything my father had left me, not just the manuscript, but the entire estate and legacy. I had no interest in exploiting the inheritance, nor did I want to turn the family legacy into a spectacle. But the reality was clear: I now held the power, and I had the opportunity to shape the future. My father may have left behind a harsh legacy, but he had given me a chance to rewrite it, to prove that I could stand on my own. I had no intention of taking revenge in the traditional sense, not through cruelty or manipulation. But there were ways to ensure that the truth was revealed. And for that, I didn't need to lift a finger. A few weeks later, I called a family meeting. This time, I wasn't walking into that room as the failure they all saw me as. I was walking in as the rightful heir, the person my father had chosen to carry the legacy forward. I invited everyone: Charlotte, Aunt Gloria, Jared, and even Mr. Vance, who had supported me when no one else would. When they all arrived, their faces were filled with curiosity, skepticism, and some level of bitterness, especially from Charlotte. But I stood tall, my heart steady as I prepared to speak. "Thank you all for coming," I began, my voice clear and firm. "I know the will reading didn't go the way you expected, but it wasn't just about what you got. This meeting is about what I'm doing with what I've been given." Charlotte raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean, Lila? This isn't a charity." "No," I replied, my voice calm but unyielding. "This is about something bigger than any of us. My father left me in charge of everything: the estate, the legacy. And I plan to honor that responsibility." I could see Charlotte's eyes narrow, and Aunt Gloria's lips tightened. Jared, too, seemed uneasy, though he hid it well. But none of them said anything. "I've already started making changes," I continued. "The family estate will be managed differently from now on. The money will be used to preserve the property and support causes that matter, ones that align with what my father's true interests were. No more lavish displays. No more waste. I'm going to make sure the Beaumont name is upheld in a way that actually means something." Aunt Gloria scoffed, but I wasn't finished. "And as for the manuscript, I'm going to publish it. It'll be my project. I'll use the proceeds to establish a scholarship in my father's name, one that supports students who, like me, never fit the mold of what the world expects. I'll make sure it's something meaningful, something that reflects who he really was." Charlotte's jaw tightened. "You're going to ruin everything," she hissed. "You're just trying to make yourself out to be the hero when all you've done is be true to who I am." I interrupted, my voice unwavering. "Yes, Charlotte. I finally figured that out. And I'm going to do it in a way that none of you ever could." I paused, letting the words hang in the air for a moment. The truth was finally out. I had no desire to continue fighting for their approval. I had already won, not by taking anything from them, but by claiming what was rightfully mine. When I looked at my family, there was no satisfaction in their faces, but there was something more important: they were silent. The power had shifted. I wasn't just the failure anymore. I was the one in control. And that, in itself, was a sweet revenge. The next few months were a whirlwind. I made the necessary changes to the estate, the donations to charity, and took steps to preserve my father's legacy in a way that mattered. As for the manuscript, it was published and received more attention than I could have expected. It wasn't a masterpiece, but it was a raw, honest account of a man who had struggled with his own demons. People saw it for what it was, and for the first time, I was proud of something my father had done. And though my family never fully accepted what I had done, I knew that the real victory was in the quiet peace I felt knowing that I had done it all on my own terms.